let's at long last deliver what we've been promising with this TK pod, Mike Dunleavy Jr., and some of the interesting stuff that was said with regard to these deals that the Warriors made in the offseason. And so let's start with the obvious one, right? Chris Paul comes in for Jordan Poole. Dunleavy talks about the transition.
To me, it was pretty seamless. It's like, okay, this is what's teed up. This is what's ready to go. And we're going to make the best decisions moving forward for our franchise. And, I always say for me, the decision to do Chris was easy. I hated having to give up Jordan, who, has been such a big part of what we did in the last few years. I was here when we drafted him. But in terms of basketball and, moving forward, financial flexibility and all that stuff that you factor in, it was a relatively easy decision for us. And then from there, you get the draft, you go into free agency. But for me, it was there's a good amount of familiarity, I think, which made it easier transitioning from myself or from Bob to myself. So it felt, I think for everybody else, it was like a whirlwind, but we were just kind of doing our job. And now we got a little bit of time to decompress and turn the page to next season.
Well, he's talking about transition to new players, but also his transition in as the GM. I've heard the question thrown out there a lot that if it would have gone this way, if Bob Myers was still at the helm. I firmly believe the answer is yes.
Yeah.
I firmly believe that. I honestly don't think that anything is really to them all that different other than, and this is a big deal, but the presence of Bob. I don't think the mindset, the thought process, the decision-making, these are all the people who were doing it alongside Bob. And you damn well better believe they discussed this throughout the season while Bob was still there. So I don't think this surprised anyone. I know he's going to throw in the nice comment about, boy, it was really, really difficult to get rid of Jordan Poole.
Right.
Even though you all damn well knew that you were going to do it. Sounded like by the time you got to January or February, you knew you were going to do it. But, I think it goes this way no matter what. And I think the transition is seamless because it's really just an extension of Bob who's still there.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting the way he laid it out in terms of the finances, but also the basketball element of it. And you do hate to see Jordan go because he had been a part of this organization since he became a pro, and you won a championship with him. So that's always a little bit bittersweet. But the thing that Steve Kerr said in his comments from earlier in the week are kind of echoed there by Mike Dunleavy Jr. in terms of getting a little bit more control, more maturity. Financially, it makes perfect sense for the future in terms of getting out of that second apron of the luxury tax threshold. So it's a sound move that makes sense for basketball and financial reasons.
TK Pod, Mike Dunleavy Jr., here's another one. Draymond and Poole, what's his response to the idea that they could not coexist on the same team?
I can't say that's not an argument. You can make a good point about that. I think the biggest thing really is just financially, we're in a position where you had to make some decisions. And I think we were able to make a decision where we could free some of that up while also still being highly competitive and having a chance to win a championship. So it just ended up having to be a decision we had to make, and so be it. And at the same time, needing to get Draymond back, what he brings to this team and what he has meant, for the last 10 years, like that's going to keep going. That matters. And so we prioritize that. And then from there, we knew another contract probably needed to be moved, and Jordan ended up being that one. But we feel like getting a player back to Chris Paul's caliber can negate that in some ways or pick up that slack. So, it's kind of the business that we do, and we're in a good spot.
Okay, so here's what I hear there. Is part of this financial? Sure. Is part of this that we wanted to turn the ball over less? Sure. Is part of this that Jordan Poole and Draymond Green could not coexist? Sure.
Yes, so it's everything that we all had thought all along, and I said it back in maybe January or so that I didn't think that these two would be able to coexist. Exactly, I locked it up then, and it's been unlocked now as fact that these two, I don't think, could continue to get along on the court. And then you add in the contractual part of it, which means you get to get freed up from Chris Paul after this year, which is a huge savings. Or if you decide that you're a winning team and you want to keep spending that much money, you can trade Chris Paul and you can replace that salary. But also the the way they played. And this is where Steve Kerr said it earlier in the week on ESPN when they were interviewing him ahead of the USA Basketball FIBA World Cup. It's that they played too fast and they turned it over too much. And Jordan Poole played faster than anybody on your team, and he had a major turnover problem. So by replacing him with a slower, steadier player, your pace will go down and your turnovers should go down.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that stuff makes sense, but I look at it this way. If a question like that gets asked and the answer was in any way, shape, or form a sort of a positive, like, oh, yeah, they could have played together, you'd have heard that. You'd have heard that.
Yeah.
But I mean, the answer right out of the gate, well, I can't say that that's not a fair argument.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, this thing was cooked. This thing was cooked. And I'm more of the mindset of what Charles Barkley said a few weeks ago. I don't know if I would have used these words, but I understand what he means when he's like, they hated Jordan Poole. I don't know about that. Like, here's Steph and Clay still working out with the guy earlier this week. So I don't know if it's necessarily personal, but I do think that it reached a level of where, again, hate being too strong of a word, but it was not a workable situation. And I don't think from a basketball standpoint, they liked playing basketball with him anymore.
That's what the hate is in terms of what Charles is saying, because you don't hate a guy and then go out and work out with him in the offseason. Those things just don't happen. Now, did they dislike playing basketball with Jordan Poole all the time? Of course not. But I'm sure there were things that Jordan Poole did from a basketball standpoint that they hated, such as closing seconds of a quarter or of a game, and Steph Curry is waiting for a chance to shoot a 33-footer, and Jordan Poole shoots a 30-footer. That's something that they don't like. Or if there's a technical free throw to be shot, and Jordan Poole just presumes that he's going to be the one to take it, and Clay or Steph says, no, young man, this is what we do. Those are things that never jibed, and I think those are part of why they had to have a parting.
One more from Mike Dunleavy Jr., TK Pod, The Athletic. And this is the thing I keep listening for that to me is really sort of the nail in the coffin. It tells all the story. And it's interesting that the Warriors have been so willing to go public with this. Listen to what he says will be the difference between last year's team and this year's team.
I think the biggest difference hopefully will be some connectivity, a little bit more connectivity. Steve's talked about it. Last year's team just didn't get off to the right start in many ways, record-wise and all the other stuff that went on. And I just feel like we never got off the ground. I think this is a team that's maybe we've put together and they've, we'll have to gel some for sure. We've got guys back that are comfortable with each other, but I think there's just a renewed sense of optimism and energy. And some of that's just with the page turn to the next season. And some of that I think is just with some roster adjustments. And so I think we're all confident about where we're at, and we got to go out there and play the games and see what happens.
All right. Some roster adjustments. That's what's going to lead to the connectivity. I just wonder. I wonder where everybody's at in terms of now when they look back on this. I don't think anybody needs to, nobody needs to change their opinion about the punch. That's like, whatever. That's sort of like a personal thing.
That happened.
It happened. There's no defending it. We've heard everybody kind of go back and forth about that. But the Golden State Warriors, just like all the other teams we talk about, have a job to do. And that job is to entertain and play basketball at the absolute highest level possible to try to win a championship. And teams, whether you like this or not, are totally willing to overlook a whole lot of crap so that they can realize that goal. And so when you look at everything that's being said, oh my gosh, I can't believe they didn't suspend Draymond. I can't believe they paid Draymond $100 million. They're enablers. They're this, that, the other. I think the point that you and I very often were trying to make throughout the year is if you are able to find a lane where you can remove the personal opinion about the people and instead just look at Warrior basketball. I wonder if everybody can now hear from like the 10th different voice and realize that the basketball was on Jordan. Now, you can absolutely come back and say, but, his head was not in the right place because of what Draymond did. That's all fine. But it's just been a fascinating offseason, man. From one passive statement to those that were not passive at all. Every single person in this organization, in their own way, has stated this didn't work because of Jordan Poole. They've all said it.
Well, I think it's more than that, but in terms of that part of it, yes. And he talked about connectivity and roster construction. Think about the roster last year. And Mike Dunleavy Jr. mentioned a slow start and a lack of connectivity and a lot of different reasons for that. You played James Wiseman a bunch early in the year, and that roster move happened just after midway through the year at the trade deadline. You got GP2, who's more of a connected player, and you ended up getting rid of Jordan Poole at the end of the year. So your roster is going to be a little bit more connected because you replace a couple of young players with a veteran in Chris Paul. And so now going into this season, you're going to feel more like everything's on the same page. You started the year 3-7, and it wasn't until 20 games in where you got to 10-10, and it was a struggle, and it was an uphill battle. And Andrew Wiggins missed half the year because of his personal difficulty. And so that led to a certain amount of, disconnectivity because you didn't have Wiggins at all, and you had Steph Curry miss a third of the year due to his injuries and load management. And Clay wasn't playing back-to-backs. All those things going into this year. Clay is going to play basketball this summer. He's already working out. He'll be in better shape. He'll be able to play more games. And you have Chris Paul. You don't have to worry about the James Wiseman experience. You've got more known commodities this year, many more known factors in terms of what you're going into the year with.
888-957-9570. Would love to take some phone calls. Let's do it. How about Larry in Lafayette? Hey, Larry, what you doing?
I'm just driving home. I just wanted to say thanks for the show. Always enjoyable. I'm a little worried about the basketball aspect here. If you look at what happened last year, and I'm not going to go into the Jordan Poole yes or no. Let's just say we are where we are. But our biggest problem last year, our highest turnovers are from Curry and Green. And if they don't play better, it's not going to matter. If we're going to slow down with Chris Paul and help them to be more accurate in the first unit, then we have a second unit without a playmaker. And, to worry, Clay was out of shape last year. He took horrible shots all year long. And Curry ran out of legs in the playoffs. He just couldn't make a shot because his legs were gone. I think Sacramento took a lot of skin off of the Warriors in that playoff. So we have to figure this out, and I'm hoping for the best, but I just don't quite see how it fits. And to blame Jordan for our turnovers, I think it's just not quite accurate and doesn't put enough accountability on the veterans.
Well, that's fair, but I want to say I didn't do that. I didn't blame Jordan Poole for all the turnovers by any stretch. I blame Jordan Poole for the word that they keep using, the lack of connectivity. That's what I blame Jordan Poole for. Some of your points are very well taken about certain players, how they need to do things differently. Look, this is going to be quite a reboot. This is going to look really different. And there are a bunch of questions that need to be answered. That's all fair, for sure. Do they slow down? Does Chris fit in? Is he willing to come off the bench? He's going to have to be. Does Kuminga take the next step? Is Clay going to be more in shape? I still think that you saw enough from the base of those guys, the core of those guys, that if they have the right, I'll borrow their word, connectivity around them, it can still be very successful. But that doesn't change the fact that there are all kinds of questions that are going to have to be answered. This is a very different team.
And I think in terms of connectivity, like last year, the basketball connectivity of what the Warriors like to do, which is player movement, ball movement, running around, Steph and Clay, catch and shoot, Draymond, the high screen, Kevon Looney setting screens and all the rest of it. And then what Jordan Poole likes to do, which is dribble, 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 attack the rim, and get mine. So that connectivity wasn't really there. Now think about this year. The Steph, Clay, Dre pass and move and cut and spot up for threes and all the rest of it versus what Chris Paul does, which is not that. Chris Paul is almost like the anti-Poole in terms of how he plays. He doesn't try to explode quickly to the hoop and get his own. He likes to plod and slowly get into pick and roll. So how is the connectivity of the offense going to be? Because Chris Paul's not going to do what Steph and Clay do with all the off-the-ball movement and all the baseline cutting. So I wonder about the connectivity in terms of when Chris is out there versus when he's not.
It was interesting to have Coach Keating in here earlier this week.
Exactly,
and
right?
Look at his face when the idea of Chris Paul with the Warriors kind of came up, and he was just like, man, his eyes kind of lit up, not in terms of, boy, like another great on this team. It was more like it is going to be fascinating to see how they figure this out. But, look, these are great basketball players, man.
Right.
I mean, these are guys that get the game at a very, very high level. I think they meet in the middle. And I think that will be good for Warrior basketball in terms of their pace, in terms of the way they approach it. They meet in the middle, and that's probably good for the team. It's probably good for them as individuals at this point in their career.
I wonder about the Chris Paul and Draymond on the court at the same time offense, because we know when it's Steph and Draymond sets the pick for Steph when Steph's on the ball, and if they double team Steph, he either bounces it or does that little droop pass to Draymond over the top, and now it's 4-on-3 with Draymond running the show from 20 feet in, and he's a maestro at that. When it's CP3 and Draymond and Steph and Clay and whoever else is the fifth, Wiggins, it doesn't really matter. How does the offense look there? Because if Draymond's not on the ball, then maybe Draymond sets the pick for Chris Paul, and well, now you're not going to necessarily double team Chris Paul because he's not a threat to pull it from 28 feet. So now Draymond sets the screen and rolls. Well, they're just going to switch that and roll with Draymond. So how effective can that screen and roll be?
I've reached the point of curiosity. In other words, the whole distaste of Chris Paul on the Warriors is getting to a point where it's being no, it's not gone. It's being drowned out by curiosity, not excitement. Curiosity on some of the stuff you were just talking about.
Right?
Like, how's that going to work?
And I mean, you can't really run a Steph and Chris Paul screen and roll. I mean, Chris Paul is going to set a screen on Steph's man, and I just wonder how it's going to look when Chris Paul is out there, because you can't really spot him up on the weak side and give him the ball to shoot a three. He's not a great three-point shooter. He's more of a screen and roll decision maker. He's like a Draymond Green kind of player on offense.